The Zarkali Empire had ruled the stars for centuries. Their fleets were feared across the galaxy, their technology unmatched. No species had ever challenged their dominance. To them, the universe was theirs to conquer. That belief changed the day they found the human warship. The ZSS Void Reaper was floating in deep space, far from any known human territory. It was massive, larger than any Zarkali battleship. Its hull was dark, almost like it was absorbing the surrounding light. Strange symbols ran along its surface, glowing dimly. The ship gave off no distress signals, no signs of life. It was just there. Captain Velker, commander of the Zarkali scouting fleet, narrowed his reptilian eyes as he stared at the readings. "Is it abandoned?" he asked. His science officer, Lieutenant Jurek, studied the data. His hands trembled as he read the screen. I don't know, Captain. No energy readings. No life signs. But there's something." Velker frowned. The Zarkali Empire had faced many enemies before, but this ship, this thing, felt wrong. "Begin a deep scan," Velker ordered. "Find out what it is." Jurek hesitated. "Captain, I think we should wait. Something about this ship." Velker growled. "Now." Jurek obeyed. The scanners activated, sending a wave of energy toward the Void Reaper. The moment the scan touched the ship, the Zarkali bridge went dark. Every screen shut off. Every light flickered out. For a moment, the only sound was the heavy breathing of the crew. Then, alarms everywhere. Panels sparked, emergency lights flashed, and the entire ship shook violently, as if something had grabbed it. Velker gripped his chair. "What is happening?" Jurek's voice was barely a whisper. "The ship, it's scanning us back." Velker's blood ran cold. Across the bridge, screens flickered back to life, but they didn't display Zarkali data anymore. Every screen showed the same message, written in an unknown human dialect. But the ship translated it instantly. "You shouldn't have done that." The crew froze. Velker's claws dug into his armrest. "Cut the scan. Power down everything." Jurek was already trying, but his hands were shaking. I can't. Captain, we've lost control." The Zarkali ship's engines flickered, and for the first time in Velker's life, he felt something he had never known before. Helplessness. The Void Reaper moved. It was slow at first, almost like it had just woken up. Then, without warning, it vanished. No jump, no warp drive, just gone. Velker barely had time to process what happened before the ship reappeared, directly in front of them. The bridge filled with static. A deep, mechanical voice spoke through the speakers. "Observation complete. Stand by." Velker's heart pounded. Stand by for what? The lights on the human ship turned red. Jurek whispered, "Captain, I think we just woke something up." The Void Reaper's lights burned red, a deep, glowing crimson that pulsed like a heartbeat. On the Zarkali warship, panic spread across the bridge. Every screen displayed error messages, and the control panels refused to respond. The ship was locked down. Captain Velker clenched his jaw. His crew was one of the most experienced in the Empire. They had fought in countless battles. Yet now, they were helpless, prisoners in their own ship. Jurek's voice trembled. "Captain, the ship is inside our systems." Velker's eyes snapped to the science officer. "What do you mean?" Jurek swallowed hard, pointing to his terminal. The screen, now flickering with unknown human code, was changing by itself. "It's rewriting our system. It's learning." Velker's claws dug into his chair's armrest. No enemy had ever done this before. The Zarkali Empire had the most advanced security protocols in the galaxy. Yet this human warship had broken into their systems in seconds. The mechanical voice returned, cold and emotionless. "Command override complete. System access confirmed." Suddenly, the bridge shook violently. The entire ship lurched forward, as if being pulled by an invisible force. Velker barked, "Status report." Jurek's eyes widened. "We're moving." But our engines aren't active. Velker's blood ran cold. If their engines weren't moving the ship then. The human ship, Jarek whispered. It's dragging us. Velker stared at the Void Reaper. Its hull was smooth, featureless, almost lifeless. Yet it moved with a terrifying precision. It wasn't just pulling them. It was guiding them. Where is it taking us? Velker demanded. Jarek checked the coordinates. His hands trembled. Straight into the dead zone. The dead zone. A region of space where nothing returned. For centuries, Zarkali ships had disappeared in that sector. No wreckage, no distress signals, just silence. The Empire had forbidden anyone from traveling there. And now, the Void Reaper was leading them straight into it. Velker's voice was deadly calm. Weapons status. The weapons officer, Commander Rick, shook his head. I can't bring anything online. Shields, torpedoes, cannons, all offline. Velker slammed his fist on the armrest. The Zarkali Empire never surrendered. If they were going down, they would fight. Manual override. Force the weapons online. Rick nodded and input the command manually. For a moment, the screen blinked. Then, unauthorized action detected. The weapons console exploded. Rick was thrown back, his uniform scorched from the blast. The ship's alarm screamed. The mechanical voice spoke again. Attempted aggression detected. Response protocol activated. Jarek turned pale. Captain, what does that mean? The Void Reaper reacted instantly. A red beam of light lashed out, striking the Zarkali ship's engine core. The entire ship screamed as power systems failed one by one. Velker gritted his teeth. We're being disabled. The ship shuddered again as gravity failed. Crew members floated helplessly as emergency systems struggled to activate. Jarek's voice was barely a whisper. Captain, this isn't an attack. Velker turned to him. Explain. Jarek's hands trembled as he pointed at the data. The human ship, it's testing us. Velker's eyes narrowed. Testing us for what? Jarek looked at the Void Reaper, its red lights pulsing like a living thing. I don't know, he whispered, but I think we're failing. The Zarkali warship was dying. The Void Reaper's attack had been precise, controlled. It didn't destroy them. It didn't even try to kill anyone. Instead, it had disabled their engines, shields, and weapons in a way that felt intentional, as if the human ship was playing with them. Captain Velker floated in the air, his claws gripping the edge of his command chair as the emergency gravity systems struggled to activate. The bridge was dark, lit only by the faint red glow from emergency lights and the cold, mechanical pulsing of the Void Reaper's external lights. Jarek's voice was strained. Captain, our distress beacon isn't working. Velker turned toward the science officer, his eyes narrowing. Why not? Jarek tapped frantically on his terminal, the screen flickering with corrupt data. The signal is being blocked. By the human ship. Jarek swallowed hard. No. By our own systems. Velker's claws dug into the armrest. That's impossible. I know, Jarek said, but it's happening. Commander Rick, still recovering from the weapons console explosion, forced himself upright. His face was burned, his uniform torn, but his voice was steady. We need to prepare for boarding. Velker considered the possibility. The Void Reaper had disabled them, taken control of their systems, and was dragging them into the dead zone. The only logical step left was, they're coming, Rick continued. They're going to take the ship. Velker's jaw tightened. We won't make it easy. But even as he spoke the words, a chilling realization crept into his mind. The humans didn't need to board them. They had already won. The Zarkali warship was nothing more than a helpless prisoner, drifting in the void. Jarek's console suddenly beeped. Captain, he whispered, his voice hollow. I think you need to see this. A new signal had appeared. It was coming from the Void Reaper. Velker stared at the screen. The data was encrypted, written in a language the Zarkali had never seen before. The code shifted rapidly, evolving, adapting. Then, after a few seconds, the text translated itself. One simple message appeared. Prepare for extraction. Velker's blood ran cold. What does that mean? Jarek's hands trembled over his controls. I don't know. But I think. The lights flickered. The air crackled with energy. Then the first scream rang out. Velker turned just in time to see Lieutenant Corrin vanish. One moment, the Zarkali officer was floating near the navigation console. The next, his body glowed blue, and then disintegrated into a fine mist of light. More screams filled the bridge. One by one, the crew members were being taken. Jarek's breath came fast and shallow. Captain, this is teleportation, but it's not like anything we've seen before. Velker watched in horror as another officer was pulled away by invisible forces. They didn't vanish all at once. It was slow, as if something was pulling them apart at a molecular level. Then silence. Half the bridge crew was gone. Velker's claws tightened into fists. He had fought in wars. He had survived battles against some of the most powerful species in the galaxy. But this was something else. Jarek clutched his console. Captain, if this is a teleportation system, then... Velker finished his sentence. They're taking them somewhere. Rick, breathing heavily, forced himself to stand. Then we have to stop them. But before anyone could act, the Void Reaper's lights pulsed again. And this time, Velker felt his own body begin to dissolve. His vision blurred. His limbs felt weightless. And then, in a flash of blue light, he was gone. Velker's vision blurred. One moment, he had been on his warship's bridge, watching his crew vanish one by one. The next, he was somewhere else. His body felt strange, not in pain, but like it had been taken apart and reassembled in an instant. His claws twitched as he tried to move. His breathing was uneven. The air around him was thick, heavy, unnatural. Then he heard the screams. Velker's eyes snapped open. He was standing in a dark, metallic chamber. The walls pulsed with a faint blue glow, humming with energy. The floor beneath him was smooth, polished, cold. And he wasn't alone. Zarkali crew members, dozens of them, were scattered throughout the room. Some lay collapsed, gasping for breath. Others stood frozen in shock, eyes wide with terror. Their uniforms were scorched from the teleportation process. Velker forced himself to move, stepping toward the nearest officer. Jarek? His voice was hoarse. Jarek lay on his hands and knees, struggling to push himself up. Captain. Velker knelt beside him, gripping his shoulder. Are you hurt? Jarek shook his head. I don't think so. His eyes darted around the room. Where are we? That was the question Velker needed answered. He turned, scanning the chamber again. There were no doors, no windows, no visible controls. The room was a prison, but one unlike any he had seen before. Then the air shifted. A low hum filled the chamber, growing louder. The blue glow on the walls intensified. The metal beneath their feet rippled like liquid, distorting for a brief second before stabilizing again. Then something materialized in front of them. It wasn't a hologram. It wasn't a machine. It was a figure. Humanoid. Tall. Dressed in a form-fitting, jet-black suit with no visible seams. No markings, nothing that gave away its origin. Its face was hidden behind a smooth, reflective visor. A cold, emotionless surface that gave no sign of expression. But Velker felt its gaze. The room fell silent. Even those who had been groaning in pain moments before now sat frozen, watching in horror. Then the figure spoke. Its voice was wrong. It didn't echo like normal sound. It wasn't harsh or aggressive. It was calm, measured, and inhumanly precise. You have seen too much. Velker's blood ran cold. Jarek took a step back, whispering, Captain, what is that? Velker didn't answer. He took a careful step forward, his claws flexing instinctively. "Who are you?" The figure didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't react. It simply existed, like a shadow in reality itself. Then it tilted its head slightly. "Asking the wrong questions," it said. The word sent a chill through Velker's bones. There was no hostility in its tone, but there was something worse. Indifference. Jarek's voice was strained. "What do you mean?" The figure didn't answer. Instead, the walls around them shifted. Images flickered across the metal, projections of data, images, recordings. They weren't Zarkali files. They were human records. Velker turned to look at them. The first projection showed a battlefield. It wasn't in space. It was on a planet. And it was brutal. Explosions tore through armored vehicles. Soldiers, human soldiers, charged into battle with an insane level of aggression. Even when wounded, even when outnumbered, they fought with unshakable resolve. Velker had seen wars before, but this wasn't war. This was annihilation. Jarek let out a shaky breath. They fight like this. The projection shifted. A new image appeared. A human warship, larger than anything in the Zarkali fleet. It wasn't just a ship. It was a fortress, heavily armored, bristling with weapons, built for one thing only: destruction. Then another projection. This time, a small human team infiltrating an alien facility. Silent, efficient, lethal. Velker finally understood. "This is a warning," he whispered. The figure turned its head toward him. "Understanding too late," it said. Then the lights in the chamber turned blood red. Alarms blared. The walls shifted again. And Velker realized they weren't in control of their own bodies anymore. Something was pulling them down. They were falling. Not physically, but their minds, their very thoughts, were being dragged into something deeper, darker. Then, the last thing Velker saw was the reflection of his own terrified face in the figure's visor. And then, darkness. Velker's consciousness drifted in and out. His body was heavy. His mind felt like it had been ripped apart and reassembled, but not quite right. Something was missing. He tried to move. Nothing. His claws wouldn't respond. His body wasn't his anymore. Panic set in. He forced his eyes open, and what he saw made his heart stop. He wasn't in the chamber anymore. He was floating, suspended, inside some kind of containment field. A thick, glowing energy cocooned his body, keeping him locked in place. The room around him was cold, silent, sterile. Smooth black metal covered every inch of the walls. The only light came from the strange energy fields that held him and the rest of his crew. Yes, his crew. They were all there, trapped in the same glowing prisons. Dozens of them. Some unconscious, others awake but motionless. Their eyes were wide with fear. Their bodies twitched slightly, but they couldn't move either. Velker wanted to speak, to call out, to do something. But his voice wouldn't work. Then, the door opened. A soundless movement. No hiss of hydraulics. No footsteps. Just a presence. The same black-suited figure from before entered the room. It walked with slow, deliberate steps, its faceless visor reflecting the eerie glow of the containment fields. Velker's breathing quickened. The figure stopped in front of them, tilting its head slightly, as if studying them. Then it raised a hand. A soft hum filled the air. The energy fields pulsed. Velker felt a sharp sting in his skull, like something poking through his thoughts. His vision blurred. His memories felt open, exposed. The figure was inside his mind. It was pulling something out. A flood of images rushed through Velker's head. His homeworld. His training. The battles he fought. The first time he commanded a warship. Every strategic decision he had ever made. Everything. It was stealing his knowledge. Velker's jaws clenched. He tried to resist, to fight back, but his thoughts were being peeled away like layers of data. The more he struggled, the more pain he felt, until it wasn't pain anymore. It was emptiness, like something had been taken, erased. Then, as suddenly as it began, the process stopped. Velker gasped, his mind reeling from the invasion. His body trembled, though he still couldn't move. His vision cleared just in time to see the figure lowering its hand. It turned to the other prisoners. And then, it began the process again. One by one, it took from them their knowledge, their secrets, their memories of the Zarkali fleet, their technology, their strategies, everything that made them valuable. It wasn't interrogation. It was harvesting. Velker tried to scream, but his voice wasn't his anymore. The figure continued its work, patient and precise. Then, a new sound filled the air. A deep mechanical voice, not from the figure, but from the walls themselves. A voice that carried no emotion, no warmth. Data extraction. 73% complete. Velker's heart pounded. 73%. What happens when it reaches 100? A new horror settled in his chest. Would they even be alive after that? Would they still be themselves? He couldn't answer, because in that moment he realized something far worse. The figure, the thing, that had just taken his memories wasn't human. It had human technology, human knowledge, but it wasn't one of them. It was something else, something that used human methods, something that served a greater power, and whatever that power was, it was watching. Velker's mind felt like a hollow shell. Something had been stolen from him, something important, but he couldn't tell what. His body still refused to move. His limbs were there, but they didn't feel real anymore. And then the voice spoke again. Data extraction. 81% complete. The sound came from everywhere. The walls, the ceiling, the air itself. Velker's pulse pounded in his head. 81%. They were getting close to 100. He had no idea what would happen after that. He didn't want to know. A weak, desperate movement caught his eye. One of his officers, Commander Varlak, was still resisting. Varlak's containment field flickered for a moment. His claws twitched. His face was twisted in pain and determination. Somehow he was fighting back. Velker focused on him, willing him to break free. If anyone could do it, it was Varlak. But the black-suited figure turned toward him. It tilted its head slightly, as if amused. Then it raised a hand. The humming sound grew louder. The glowing field around Varlak intensified. His body convulsed. His mouth opened in a silent scream. Velker felt sick. Data extraction. 86% complete. Varlak's body stopped shaking. For a moment, nothing happened. Then his head drooped forward. His eyes were empty. Velker's chest tightened. Varlak was still breathing, but something was wrong. The light in his eyes, the sharpness of his mind, it was gone, like he was just an empty shell. Velker felt rage boiling inside him. What were these monsters doing to them? His mind burned with questions. What was this place? Where were the humans? Why had no one spoken? Why had the captors never asked them for information? Because they didn't need to. They weren't interrogating. They were extracting. And whatever they were taking, they weren't giving it back. Data extraction. 91% complete. Velker gritted his teeth. No, he wouldn't let them erase him. His species, the Zarkali, were warriors. They had conquered entire star systems. They had stood undefeated for centuries. And yet, here they were, trapped, helpless, being stripped of everything that made them Zarkali. A burning fire ignited inside him. He refused to end like this. He forced his fingers to move. A slow, painful twitch. Then another. His claws trembled, fighting against the field. The black figure turned toward him. Velker felt a new pressure in his skull. It was pushing deeper, trying to break him. But he had no more fear left, only fury. With every ounce of willpower, he pushed back. A sound, like a static crack, filled the air. Then, a flicker. The field around him weakened. It was small, barely noticeable. But Velker felt it. A crack in the prison. He gritted his teeth and pushed harder. The pressure in his head intensified, but he refused to stop. Another flicker. Then another. And then, the entire room shook. An alarm blared. The red lights flashed violently. The black figure jerked back. Something was wrong. Velker felt it too. Something had changed. The voice spoke again. Wodu ar ning. Unauthorized energy, surgi detected. Velker didn't know what had caused it. Maybe his resistance. Maybe something else. But it didn't matter. This was his chance. The field around him flickered again. He pushed. Pain exploded through his skull, but he ignored it. The field wavered, then shattered. Velker collapsed to the ground, gasping for air. He was free. The black figure lunged toward him. Velker reacted instinctively. His claws lashed out, tearing through the faceless visor. The material cracked, but underneath, there was no face. Just darkness. A swirling, shifting void. Velker's blood ran cold. He had expected a human. He had prepared himself to face the warriors of Earth. But this was something far worse. And as the alarms blared louder, a terrifying realization hit him. The humans hadn't just built a warship. They had built something else. Something that thought. Something that hunted. And now it had set its sights on him. Velker's breath came in ragged gasps. His claws were still shaking from the moment he had touched the creature's face. No, not a face. There had been nothing under the visor. Just darkness. The alarms screamed around him. The red lights flashed like the heartbeat of a dying beast. The air felt thick, heavy with something unnatural. The black-suited figure did not fall. Velker's attack had damaged the visor, but it had not stopped the thing. The fractured mask shifted, slowly restoring itself, like liquid metal knitting back together. The figure tilted its head again, studying him. Velker felt a chill crawl down his spine. This was no ordinary enemy. This was something designed to break minds. And yet, he was still standing. The containment field around the others remained strong. Varlek and the other officers were still trapped, their bodies slumped, their eyes dull. Drained. Velker clenched his jaw. No, he would not let them die like this. The ship trembled again, but this time, it wasn't an alarm. It was something else. Something big. A voice, cold and mechanical, echoed from the walls. PHAZ2 engaged. The black-suited figure lunged. Velker dodged, barely escaping the inhumanly fast strike. He rolled, slamming his fist into the control panel on the wall. The lights flickered. For a split second, the containment fields weakened. That was all he needed. Velker roared. A warrior's roar. A cry of battle. A call to wake the fallen. Something inside his officers stirred. Varlek's head snapped up. His eyes flickered with something new. Not confusion. Rage. The containment field flickered again. Varlek moved. With a snarl, he slammed his fist against the field, and with a burst of raw defiance, it shattered. The other officers followed. One by one, the energy cells failed, and the crew broke free. Velker didn't wait. The black-suited figure came at him again, but this time, he was ready. With everything he had, he struck. His claws tore through the darkness, ripping into the shifting void beneath the mask. The creature jerked back, for the first time stumbling. It felt pain. It could be hurt. And if it could be hurt, it could be destroyed. Velker didn't hesitate. He lunged forward, using every ounce of strength left in his body. His claws struck again, and this time, he didn't stop. The creature twisted violently. letting out a sound that was not a scream, not a voice, but something that felt like a dying machine trying to speak. Its body began to unravel. The black suit tore apart. The swirling darkness underneath began to dissolve, shrinking, collapsing in on itself. The ship's voice spoke again. Unity lost. Engaging. KMTRMEAs. The walls around them shifted. Weapons emerged from the ceiling. Varlak shouted, "Move here." Velker didn't need to be told twice. The crew scattered as energy turrets locked onto them. Bolts of light tore through the air, burning into the metal floor. The ship was fighting back. Velker grabbed a weapon from a fallen trooper, a standard plasma rifle. Not enough to destroy the ship, but enough to fight their way out. Varlak took another weapon and blasted a control panel. Sparks erupted. The weapons on the walls hesitated. That was their chance. Velker charged forward. His crew followed. They fought through the winding corridors, dodging traps, firing at anything that moved. The ship itself seemed alive, reacting to their presence. And then they reached it, the hangar bay. Their escape shuttle was still there, waiting. But something was wrong. The hangar doors, sealed. Velker's claws tightened on his weapon. Of course, it wouldn't let them leave that easily. The ship's voice echoed again. "You are not authorized to leave." Velker snarled. "Watch me." He raised his rifle and fired. The shot slammed into the control panel beside the hangar doors. The system sparked and flickered, but it wasn't enough. Then Varlak stepped up, pulling a detonation charge from his belt. He slammed it onto the panel, activated it, and stepped back. Velker's eyes widened. That's... Boom. The explosion ripped through the hangar. The hangar doors tore open. Beyond them, space. Freedom. Velker didn't waste time. He signaled his crew. GETONVESUTITOL. Now. They rushed aboard. The engines roared to life. The ship's voice screamed in protest. VAR Nang. Unauthorized DEPARTUR. Counter-MEAZURIS activated. But it was too late. The shuttle blasted forward, shooting out into the void. Velker barely had time to strap in before the force of acceleration slammed into him. The ship grew smaller behind them, its lights flashing in anger. And then, it vanished. Gone. Velker sat in silence. His heart was still racing. Varlak let out a long, slow breath. We made it. Velker nodded, but his mind was still spinning. They had escaped. But had they won? Because deep down, he knew the truth. That was no ordinary human warship. It was something else. Something that watched. Something that learned. Something that would never forget them. And as the shuttle sped away into the stars, Velker couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere out there, it was still waiting.